Welcome to this session, which is entitled Clean Europe, Making Climate Neutrality a Reality. I should start off by apologizing for not being Clara de la Torre, my colleague, Deputy Director General in DG Clima, who had intended to chair this panel. She unfortunately had a difficulty at the last minute. So I'm Patrick Child, Deputy Director General in DG Research and Innovation, and I'm really excited to be here. We've been following, of course, the discussions in New York in the last few days, and indeed I think one of our panelists was there and will be able to bring us back fresh news from New York. But I guess that we've all seen the result of the climate summit in adopting the new scientific report called United in Science, which again I think confirms the message that we're all familiar with, the huge scale of the challenges ahead of us in terms of the transition that will be necessary in order to achieve our goals for fundamental socio-economic transformation in our societies, in order to address the challenges of climate change, but also to manage the transitions that this implies, not just ecological, but also social and economic. Last November, the European Commission adopted its now, I think, very familiar communication, One Planet, Clean Planet for All, which proposed a number of scenarios leading to full decarbonisation of our economy by 2050. And I think we've had a very encouraging mobilization of discussion across the European Union since then, which has, I think, culminated in the very powerful messages on environmental sustainability in the political guidelines of President-elect van der Leyen, and her ambition, which we're all very much looking forward to contributing to, for a Green Deal for the European Union. And I think that it is very, very clear, given the scale of the challenges that we're facing, that in order to achieve a climate-neutral continent by 2050, that research and innovation will have to be a very, very important part of that. We will also have to find ways of production and consumption which makes our economy fully circular. We need to address decarbonisation, particularly in the challenging areas of energy-intensive industries, and all the related challenges that there are in our cities, in our societies, and above all, in bringing our citizens with us in this extremely challenging journey. And these are the issues that we want to address today as we discuss with you in preparation for the future Horizon Europe framework program, how we will particularly use the many missions that we have in the area of climate, whether it's for cities, oceans, soil, or climate adaptation. A large number of the missions focused on these issues, but also the rest of the cluster dedicated to climate, energy, and mobility, which is one of the really big building blocks of our future program. So I'm really delighted to have such a distinguished panel with us today to give us a few opening remarks and also to lead our discussion. And I just want to introduce them briefly. So we have first Anna Koning-Jelmyr, the mayor of Stockholm, who is also a very leading figure in the network of major European cities, Eurocities. And we're delighted to know that Stockholm is well on its way to become a fossil fuel free by 2040, setting, I think, a very impressive lead on that. Sandrine Dixon de Clerve, co-president of the Club de Rome. She was, I think, in New York earlier in the week, but also special advisor to the Energy Transition Committee, and I think a recognized authority in these issues in Brussels and beyond. So welcome, Sandrine. We also have Sir Philippe Samin, a very distinguished scientist and one of the greatest Belgian architects of our time, who's made, I think, also some very powerful contributions to some of the buildings that we live and work in particular the new building of the European Council with its extremely original creation. So really delighted to have you with us. And also Magnus Angerström, co-founder and managing director of Clean Tech Scandinavia, a network which brings together venture funds, multilateral companies, energy companies, and someone who has a particular passion for environmental economics. So I can't think of a better group of people and a better mix of experts to address these issues. And so I'd like to kick off by just inviting the panelists in a very few words to share with us, introducing themselves and to share with us a few thoughts, and then we'll get into some more crunchy questions that we've prepared. So perhaps we start with Anna.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and have the possibility to discuss the upcoming research and innovation program in the EU, and also of achieving carbon neutrality. And I think we have a lot of technique at place, but it has to be scalable. But we also have to see more of investment in new technique. But of course, we will come back to that. And for a city as Stockholm, we have for a long time been a front runner when it comes to the field of climate mitigation and adaptation. And we are one of the fastest growing regions in Europe. And despite that, we have seen a decrease in CO2 emission by 58% since 1990. But still we have economic growth. So we combine both of these. It's very important for us to have the green growth, and we are working more on that. And we will even step up more when it comes to our ambitions, when it comes to reducing the CO2 emissions. We had a vision about being neutral by 2040 and within the city organization by 2030. But now we actually are looking, can we be climate positive? And that is the next step by 2040. And then perhaps, and we'll come back to that later, we have to talk about, carbon capture. To be climate positive, but this is our goal, and we will be sure to set up both activities and measures that are required to reach that goal. Because we have to bend the carbon emission curve on time. And we all know what is discussed on a global level now with our Swedish Greta calling for action. And we have to make sure that we limit the global average temperature by 1.5 Celsius degree above pre-industrial levels. And that's why we are all here today. And I think the cities are really important in that aim. And as a mayor, I have both when it comes to my internal work, but also on an international level, I set up this ambitions to work with the climate issue as my top three priorities when it comes for the Eurocities, where I'm the president, and we are gathering 140 cities around Europe. So we will make sure to be carbon neutral, and I'm hoping that more and more cities will combine and be with us in that effort.
Thank you very much. Sandrine.
Yeah, I want to build on that. And first of all, thank you, Anna, for your leadership and also the leadership of Sweden, because moving towards a not only carbon neutral, but actually carbon positive target is quite phenomenal. I'm one of the ones that just flew in actually from New York, and as Patrick indicated, was involved in the conversations in New York. And I think many of you saw the photo of Greta looking at Trump as he was coming in the door. And I think that her facial expressions demonstrates a little bit the frustration that we're all confronted with. As president of the Club of Rome, an organization that wrote its seminal report in 1972, and by the way, I was born in 1966, 50 years ago, we already started to talk about the limits to growth. And if you go back to the limits to growth and that report, you will see that actually every single scenario that we are living now in terms of the impact on our resources has come to fruition, to the point of actually predicting the ppm of carbon that will actually be in our atmosphere. So why is it that in 50 years we haven't been able to control either our growth and our impact on planetary boundaries, or even come to a position where leaders are willing, as we just saw on Monday, to actually state an emergency? And we have more than 1,000 declarations across the globe, predominantly from cities, who have indicated that it is an emergency situation. And you're absolutely right, Patrick, as you indicated, we now have a report which indicates that all the scientists have come together behind the fact that the science is true. We've seen the IPCC 1.5 report, the LANDS report. We had a variety of biodiversity and extinction predictions as well that came out this year. All of that science stacks up, and yet the leadership does not have the political will now to really step up to the plate, apart from Europe and a few other countries. And I really commend Europe and also research and innovation for the way in which you're innovating, both in terms of governance as well as technology, and I'll come to the technology point. Let's come to governance. From a governance perspective, the fact that here in the DG, we are actually moving to people, planet, and prosperity based on Kate Rayworth's donut economics is phenomenal. Nowhere else in the world have we started to put prosperity in a new light or planet and people at the same level in terms of the way in which we look at research innovation. So again, I commend the European Commission for being so wise in its approach. Secondly, we now have a president who has declared that the Green New Deal is going to be her legacy. Now, to translate that Green New Deal is going to be what is difficult. And this is where we need to bring both innovation and research alongside existing enabling technology and existing enabling policy to ensure that we do exactly as Anna indicated, scale up our technology. So I think that to summarize, we're in an emergency situation. We need to move, and we actually launched our planetary emergency plan with your new Vice President Timmermans on Monday. Actually, Boris Johnson was there as well. This is before he found out that he got the boot. But he was very gracious and actually also committed a great deal of money to moving forward. And I think that with the UK, whether or not we see Brexit, we will continue to see a partnership in trying to ensure that we do move forward. But my last point is absolutely the shift of capital. I went to give the keynote at the Principles for Responsible Banking that were launched also on Monday, as were also a series of commitments from private and public sector for an enhancement of capital going straight into green projects. And here at the European level, I've been an advisor on the new taxonomy, which is putting in place clear criteria both for green projects as well as transition projects, in particular in manufacturing all the way through energy. And I think, again, we are taking a leadership here in Europe to ensure that our capital actually flows to the right projects, but that we also help the manufacturing sector to shift their technologies to decarbonisation. Because it's the hard-to-abate sectors that are the ones that we really need to focus on as we move forward. So a lot of good signs coming out of Europe. We absolutely need to make sure that we bring the rest of the world on board. And we can do that by demonstrating true leadership and innovation as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, Philippe.
Well, how should we build? The question is, why should we build? Haven't we built enough on the planet? Then, what should we build first? And then only after answering the why and the what, we as architects may start to think how. And this is fundamental. I mean, very often the fact that we don't know why and what we build leads to polluting buildings. And remember, we have, with the two World War, destroy all the craftsmanship existing, no building materials, and so concrete arrived to house people, with a huge and a very frightening evolution of Portland cement production on the planet. Nowadays, more than 4 billion a year, and you need 3 times more sand. A fisherman in Senegal is wiser to leave rot his ship along the coast and sell the sand of the coast. Now, the fundamental challenge we face in building is the innovation. Innovation on one side and discovery, history on the other side. It is amazing to see how in all the industrial activity, economics, innovation very fast comes from the lab to the product. In construction, it takes 30 years. It is unacceptable. I'll give you a couple of examples. A Finnish guy invented the siphonic drainage system for roofs. Very simple thing, costs nothing. Allow you to gather the rainwater in a tank on the roof, avoid sewage polluting the ground, which are leaking, yet it is not used enough on the planet. High-strength steel, and it's the same year that cars are made with S1500, 1500 megapascal steel for cars, but in the building industry, we're still using 235. So steel, which is 6 times less strong. Why don't we use high-strength steel. We could make building 6 times lighter, 6 times less expensive, so 6 times less polluting. Another example, amazing. A prof at University of New South Wales in Australia invented vacuum glass in '89. Nippon Sheet Glass bought the patent. But it is not until this year that AGC is producing vacuum glass. With 60 millimeter thickness, with a K value of 0.4, it's as insulating as triple glazing, full of silicone and aluminum, and it's a ceramic border. And so those inventions, which are 30 years old, it is unacceptable that they are used now and that the industry is not progressing. On the other hand, the why is related to history. You know, we cannot make a building neglecting the genius loci. And the genius loci, the spirit of the place, is fundamental. And you know, you better make a building in raw earth than in concrete, and you can do it. It is unacceptable that in Belgium, the factory of Wallin is bankrupt making raw earth brick. And it is one of the best clay brick you can imagine in Europe. Yet, you cannot get them to make a building. So I want to make a raw earth building, but I have no supplies. And raw earth building is still a very, very high engineered product to make buildings up to 6, 7 floors. And at the lowest energy cost, etc., etc. Now, finally, the architecture itself. We are coming out of a kind of Middle Age period where everybody shows their muscles, weird screw, curves, building and a shape, making nonsense. Let's go to basics. Let's make generic building like Cerda made in Barcelona, Haussmann in Paris. I mean, you see Paris, those buildings can house housing, shops, universities, hospitals, any kind of human activity. So if you think about the geometry of a building, you might build things which are quite resilient to time. And then maybe you can use concrete, because concrete is not so bad if you don't have to destroy it after a century. If you can be sure that you invest for long term, it's good. So make buildings which are generic, or make them dismantleable. This is fundamental. Don't make specific building you cannot dismantle and reuse the components. Assure that every space gets daylight. It is amazing to see how daylight is neglected. We have made the headquarters of AGC in Louvain-la-Neuve. It's a zero-energy building because it's daylight, you know. So daylight and natural ventilation. Of course, then you need clean air when you open the window. But imagining that you can live in an aquarium with sealed windows is a nonsense. Utopia, born after World War II. Let's go back to basics. Have a window, heard the sound of the birds, the smell of the trees, just air and light, you know, and simple buildings, fundamental. And that's basic, before any kind of technological gadget. So one side, let's use science and technology, discovering a wonderful thing every day. There's a guy at MIT now having found a way to make concrete with 0 CO2 impact. And on the other hand, let's go back to the fundamentals. And I can continue, but I think it's time to over to you.
Thank you. Magnus, a few introductions.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I started my first venture in the sustainability area 30 years ago. Which means that I helped out carrying shares at the famous legendary UN conference in Rio, for example. So for the past 12 years, I've been working with Cleantech Scandinavia, and that's a membership network of international investors and industry actors that are interested mainly in Nordic and Baltic cleantech. And we try to provide them with investment opportunities, etc. And it's a magnificent flow, no doubt of it. We see some 300-400 new innovations coming out of the Nordics every year in this area. So it's a great flow of new innovation. There's no lack of it, as someone said. On the investment side, we have had an interesting ride. In the beginning, we were almost like rock stars because it was going up every year. Then after the financial crisis, it fell quite radically, but it made its way up. And I can tell you, for the last 2 years, it's been going through the roof in terms of investments. Last year, we had an increase of 73% of investments. So that is really encouraging, I think. Growth is another thing. We checked 1,000 startups, and For the past 2 years, they increased their revenue with 50%. So it's good, but it's from low levels, right? So I was thinking before coming here, what could be interesting for everyone here, and in terms of innovation, I think there's 2 things. One thing is that we are not good enough to explain the impact of innovation. We all need to be better at explaining impact of innovation. That's one thing. The second thing is that we are not good at explaining the future in a way. I think many of the people that are not on board, as we say, they think that we are trying to create a gray future, right? Or just very green, but nothing else, not a happy place, right? We just need to be better at explaining that this is and explain how cool this new future will look like. Those are 2 macro things that I think we should spend some time thinking about.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much for those introductory remarks. And what I'd like to do now in the time we have is to sort of invite our panelists, and I hope with some contributions from all of you, to get into the substance a bit more. Firstly, about what are the challenges, and how do we go about actually achieving carbon neutrality? I mean, we've all got a good sense of where we want to go, but how we get there is the challenge. And then the second round would be on, well, what can we do using, in particular, the EU's Research and Innovation Capacity Horizon Europe in order to support that movement. So I'd like perhaps to start with Anna. I mean, you've mentioned the impressive targets that Stockholm has set itself, and the sort of leadership that it's showing in the global community of cities, and I think that's really exciting and positive. But can you share with us a little bit more in detail, how do you actually go about carrying people with you in the city to achieve the sort of impressive results that you've been talking about?
Yeah, for one thing, I think it's very important that we don't only just have ambitious goals, we have to have the activities as well, and also to communicate the impact. I totally agree with that. So what we have to do more, and what Eurocities is working with as well, is to have this best practice that we can share between cities. But also I think we have to include the entrepreneurs as well, because we have a lot of impact entrepreneurs now with new system for vacuuming the ocean for microplastic and so on, and we need to know to show the impact of what they are doing. But I think some of the good examples that we can show as a city is, for example, the biofuels that we are using for our public transports. So all our buses use biofuel, and of course also when it comes to taxis in the city, when it comes to waste collection truck, municipal cars, they are all using this fuel, and it's actually collected of organic waste, and it's used together with sewage in the city's biogas plant. And I know sometimes it's discussed, biofuel, but it's really important for us when it comes to reaching our goals. And it's also one way for us to phase out fossil fuel and use the more renewable energy. But of course, we also see a transformation in the city as many for electricity. We are not there yet, but we see a larger demand when it comes to electric buses, and we will use electric buses in the central city by 2025. And we see also it's still quite expensive. We still see an increasing demand, and I will come back to that. We also have different projects, for example, to combine logistic when it comes to delivering of goods in the city and combined with actually picking up waste. So we have a collaboration with companies, with the cities and logistic businesses and shop owners. So we are transferring e-truck delivery. We are using delivery, and it's also electric trucks. We deliver goods, and at the same time they pick up the waste. So that is one example how we actually lowered the emission, and we have less traffic now in the city centers. And another thing is the electric charging facilities. We now have 500 of that in the city, and we're collaborating with businesses. And we actually, as a city, provide free utility of companies to set up these charging stations. But then it raised another question, of course: how is the electricity being produced? And that's why we have to discuss the problem with coal, for example. So it's not just only about charging station, it's actually how is the electricity produced? And I think that is another question we have to raise in Europe and worldwide, of course. And it's about politics. It's about taking the brave decisions, taking sometimes the difficult decision, because it could be painful for citizens with the transformation. Because in a couple of years, perhaps you are not allowed in the city if you don't have a certain car or vehicle. And we have to signal that now so they can actually also transform and being part of this system. I mean, a lot of people in the city use public transport with buses. I mean, I think it's 70% when it comes to rush hours, and 100% of our buses is running of renewable fuels. So the transport is, of course, very important, and we have to have the citizen with us, using more the bikes, the buses, and so on. And this far, they are very positive to our very ambitious climate policy. 90% support it when we ask the citizens. But of course, it's also communicating actually what we are doing and the ambitious goal, and that these efforts are actually really meaning true impact when it comes to CO2 emissions. Another thing that also helped us reaching this very ambitious goal, of course, is the district heating. That's for 80% of our energy demand. And now we are looking for the next step. And here we need research and innovation and funding when it comes to carbon capture and storage. That could be the next step. And to collaborate with other cities and countries, as for example Norway, and then we can use climate positive district heating in the future. But it is one way, and that is also it's produced by waste. So the citizen can see that their waste is actually transformed to district heating, and that is also one way that we are collaborating with the citizens. I could talk for hours, but I will not. I have a few minutes, so I will not take.
No, thanks very much, Anna. And I think you make a very good, sort of linkage between the very practical, the very sort of day-to-day things which people see and make a difference in their lives, but also the importance of courage and political leadership in actually confronting some of the challenges in a very ambitious way. And I think you set a very good example. Perhaps brings me on to Sandrine. I mean, the Club of Rome has rightly highlighted the climate emergency, and you've talked about it a little bit a bit already. And I think we are rightly proud in Europe of our sort of global leadership on sustainability, climate change. And of course, in a group like this, we're all sort of fully motivated and determined and know where we're going. But can you help us with some more practical suggestions about how we can bring these issues even more into the mainstream of political debate, so that we can capitalize the sort of intellectual leadership we have in a more sort of direct and practical way?
What a fantastic question. I think the key is that we have to figure out that we have to use the next decade to invest in the infrastructure that's going to get us to net zero. Right. And most people, and this is the biggest issue that we're confronted with now, is that even though the Club of Rome has always said we need to have a systems approach, we need to shift all of our systems, our economic system, our finance system, to move away from continuous growth, so even beyond GDP, what I often say is you almost have to bake two cakes. You have the short-term cake, which is core interventions that are going to put in place the infrastructure that you need to get to your 2050 target, but also understanding that you need to bring people on board. So that's the human dimension. So we've seen, the cross-section between the Gilets jaunes and the students. The students calling for, the end of the planet, and the Gilets jaunes indicating that it's the end of the month that concerns them the most. How do we bridge that gap? The way we bridge that gap is by moving also a great deal of our capital into funds, just transition funds, which are going to ensure that those are going to shift out of our high carbon economy, are going to be protected. And there are a variety of ways to do that. I mean, either you can create funds. We've already seen that the Swedish example of creating a just transition fund, the Norwegians, their pension has also shifted and started to create a similar type of fund. But also the shift in terms of taxation itself. What we need to do is move away from the taxation of labor, for example, into the taxation of products to really start to cost externalities. Now, where is the issue there? Our trade issues. Because what we're doing is we're actually penalizing a great deal of our industry. And I work with the Energy Transition Commission with the hard-to-abate sectors, so aluminium, cement, steel, etc. All of these sectors are starting to make the shift that they need. We have one of the most extraordinary net zero steel companies that's really moving in that direction. In Sweden, we have a similar with Norsk Hydro moving in that direction. How can we ensure that through the policies that we have at the European Commission at the member state level, we enable those types of companies to continue to be leaders but bring more of the industry on board? One of the ways to do that is we do need to really discuss border taxation, or at least some kind of product differentiation where we start to put in place the externalities as we bring in high carbon products and we actually are forcing our own industry to do the reverse. The other key issue, I think, is procurement. What I hear from most of those that are really on the leadership front and who have those products is we're not helping them in enabling the demand for their products. So many companies are putting themselves out on a ledge, have listened to our calls, have invested in a low carbon economy, and yet we're not helping them in creating the demand for those products. We must actually put in place a tax incentive system or some kind of incentive system, procurement as well, not only in terms of public procurement, but private procurement. Then the other area is to take care of those perversities that we're seeing in the system. So I sit on the Aluminium Sustainability Advisory Board, and I went and actually met a series of different site managers in a variety of different production plants. And one of the production plants in particular showed me their recycling facility in Germany, where normally the recycling has to be separated. But what happens is it's not properly separated. Aluminium can be recycled up to 98%. When it's not properly separated from plastic, what happens is it can't be recycled because it cannot go into a hot smelter. It will blow up if it has plastic in there. That's a major perversity. Our other key perversity, clearly, is the fact that we're not looking at the optimization of digitalization. I went and visited another factory. What did they do? They actually now are producing the most clean aluminium, very specific type of aluminium for most of our auto manufacturers. They've outbid most of the Chinese because of the specificity of their product. But in addition, they've put in AI, they've put in digitalization, they've optimized their plant to be able to produce these products, and they've hired more people. They've created a community plan to actually speak to the people, to give them more employment so that they also understand that there's a win-win in moving towards decarbonization. So I would finish with the last key point comes back to exactly what Anna said. We must start to communicate that vision of what a low-carbon economy can look like. We can remain competitive and even out-compete. We can hire more people. We can invest in digitalization, not to replace our people, but actually to optimize those skills and bring new skills. And we can win across the board in Europe by also being a social Europe that takes into consideration people, not just technology.
No, thanks. I mean, I think that's all, absolutely spot on. And I mean, in particular, you make, I think, very convincingly the case that this has got to be a broad agenda. Research and innovation by itself is not going to achieve all that we need. We need to carry the people with us, and we need to have it as part of an overarching policy framework, bringing together, our industrial strategy, our approach to artificial intelligence, as well as what we're doing to sort of modernize and improve the lives of our citizens. And I think that's what the Green Deal
absolutely
provides us a real framework to doing. But I'd like to move on to Philippe, if I may. I mean, you've talked about the challenge that you face in the architecture sector of getting people to embrace the potential of new technologies that are there. And I wonder whether, you can perhaps develop that a bit more and say, well, what can you do, what can we do in order to convince people that actually moving towards the sort of systems, for example, for natural ventilation in buildings is a good idea, or to get them to embrace using sort of circular materials, things that can be recycled. Got some thoughts?
Before that, again, why do we do things? I'll give you an example. A cultural building should be the first one which should be show the example in terms of energy. So we are in a cultural building. Isn't it amazing that we're not in daylight, we're not in natural ventilation, or outside there is enough daylight to have this event with a window and with open windows with no noise. So imagine that we should first say in the Urban Commission, no cultural center with artificial light when you can have daylight. No ventilation in an auditorium when you can open a window. I mean, this represents a huge amount of energy. So we don't think enough about why, what is the question, and this is, caricatural. I was speaking about energy saving, and we're in a closed box, consuming a lot of CO2, a lot of energy, unnecessarily. Now, I think there was a building and then the environment, really, I think engineers should get courses of history to think about what are they doing, in which kind of global system they're doing. You see, in Yazd in Iran, the oldest city still acting now, 4 million years old, 4 million years ago, was extremely high temperature, mind you, they invented wind chimneys. No airco, but when you're in Yazd, in hot summer days, you're comfortable in the houses, and you have ice in the ground. On the other hand, you have the Sami living in minus 40 in northern Finland. They're surviving. Now, in Peru, the Incas living at 4 kilometers high have a air pressure about 1/4 so far, not 100,000 Pascal, but 30,000 Pascal, so 4 times less oxygen, still living, you see? So if we compare, how other people on the planet are living and what we are spoiling, and this is a magnificent example. What are we doing that? The cities, for example, there are some immediate measures to be taken. Limit the speed in any city of any moving object, including bikes, 30 kilometers an hour. You will see the casualty reduced. I mean, the earnings, the added value that can be get out of limiting in all the cities the speed of any moving object, including the bikes and the trottinette, to 30 kilometers an hour, you will see how peaceful the city will become. And if you check the average speed you have now, it is less than 30 kilometers an hour. Even if you rush at 50, or if you take a ring at 90 or 120 kilometers an hour, you're always below 30 kilometers an hour. Other thing which is really outrageous, the car industry now gets in panic. We are smashed with TV advertising about cars. And what do they sell us? Big SUV cars, for one person. And we had normal cars, and now instead of making smaller cars, a one-person car with a trolley behind you, they're making bigger cars for one person, and you see them in this. So why does Europe not favor the development of a one-person car or a two-person car, or cars you glue together? You invent a system to make a car that can expand, and in the weekend you get 4 of your modules to go with your family, but in the week you go with a small car, and it's, there is no traffic problem anymore. And you have not to constrain, because there is a big danger of tyranny, of totalitarianism about the environment. At a certain period of time, people will get in panic. And you see that already in a lot of administration, they get in panic. Can you imagine we're making the building of applied science of Brussels University, which I want to be exemplary. Young engineers have to be in a building the most sustainable they can imagine. I was got the instruction, the order, not to put wood paneling on the facade, because there is a King's decree in Belgium which don't allow you that. When I was speaking that about the mayor of Stockholm, she was amazed. I have to expatriate myself to Netherlands or France to put the wood panel on the facade. But in our little kingdom, there is one technocrat one day we say that wood burns. We all know that wood burns, right? And there's no reason not to use wood, etc., etc. And so why are we doing things? And I can continue, you know, on a lot of items, but I'll stop here.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. And I think your point about the European institutions leading by example is a very important one, and one we should certainly take on board. It was raining yesterday, and there was water coming in through the roof, and so at least in this area we were protected. But I take your point absolutely. Magnus, share us perhaps a few thoughts on you know what it is that is perhaps holding back entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized companies, from you know sort of embracing the opportunities of new sort of clean technologies and bringing them to market in Europe, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, first of all, as I said, the flow of innovation is great, that's for sure. The problem is that the pace that it gets to the market, it is way too slow. With the crisis that we are facing. So we need to do something about that. And the reasons for it is a myriad of things. It's not just one thing, it's many things. Some things is that could be summarized with silo things. For example, when you start a company, you start with a researcher or industrial engineer sitting somewhere with an idea. Usually that is the situation for a very long time. So one of the problems is that you don't assign the right teams for the right ideas. So that's one thing that needs to be solved for this to go quicker. Another silo is the industrial partnerships themselves. We see, of course, an innovator, if they get a big industry company as a supporter, great, they have it almost done, right? But that's not true. It very often stays that way with one industrial player. So we are actually starting something called Impact Venture Builder, where we work together with some large corporates and energy companies. Imagine you have an idea that is supported by 10 big corporates around the world. That will lower the cost for bringing the idea in the open. And if you do, it will be on the global market directly. It won't take all that time. So that's one thing that needs to be pushed forward. Educating the customer is an important thing. Goes for example, for cities. Cities, they're really knowledgeable in their own silos of the city, but very few people work on cross-silo innovation. That is something that could be both organized in another way and improve the knowledge. Real estate is another area where knowledge is not always as good as it could be, I think. Talking about the impact funding is another new funding models. This will take time. Some of these things will take time. Looking at clean tech, it always surprises me that also these heavy industry things, that they really think that they can build a new industrial company in a short time. I think they should start to look at things like licensing models, because the industry companies, they're really there now to support it, very much like they do in the life science area. I think that's an important thing. Go global, I think that's important. It's possible today, I think, in this global world. You don't have to stay at home. You can go to the big markets. Sweden is a great place for innovation, but maybe smaller marketplace. Maybe you should go to Germany, North America, or even China to increase your... So yeah, there's some of the areas.
No, well, look, thank you very much. And I mean, our panelists, I've got lots more challenging questions from our panelists, but I see that the time is moving on, and I want to give an opportunity to engage with the room. So I don't know whether anyone wants to come in now. I mean, do you agree with all you've heard? Are there things that are in there? Otherwise, I think excellent and thoughtful contributions to our discussion. Who would like to come in? And I don't know what the rule is about microphones. In the smaller rooms, we have microphones to throw around, which is quite fun. But here, I guess we can use the microphones on the table. Yeah, the gentleman over there. You can have this one. I'll do the modern moderating, yeah? And please say who you are, right?
Okay. Yes, my name is Pierre Joris. I'm chairman of Spire, which is a cross-sectorial association between the process industries in Europe. So my question goes more specifically to Mrs. Dixon-de-Clèves. And although I was really inspired by all the testimony, but I was fascinated by all the point that you suggested, because I am fully aligned with everything you said. And as representing the industry, of course, I'm quite sensitive to the competitiveness issue. So tax on products, which I think would be a very great thing to promote the CO2-free products in Europe and also protect from the import, I think is a great idea. One of the areas where we are still a little bit skeptical in this is regarding the exports. A lot of our industries are strong in exporting, and this is one of the strengths of Europe. So how do you have any ideas how we could deal with this? So how we can make sure that our industries that want to become champion in decarbonization are not penalized when it comes to exporting their products into markets that may not yet value the carbon-free aspect, etc. So
that's very good question. Absolutely. Thank you. Should I go ahead and take that?
Yeah, just respond directly. That's great.
So I was recently with Pascal Lamy, who was the former commissioner here for trade and also the head of the WTO. And even Pascal Lamy is one to admit that the trade system no longer functions and the WTO doesn't function in order to really enable the move towards a low-carbon economy. I think that one of the ways to do that is that we must, in all of our bilateral trade discussions, embed the conversation around carbon. And we must figure out ways to ensure that our products do have access to other markets. Because we know that, first of all, already with the lovely sanctions that we had on steel and aluminum coming from the United States, that we don't have the same access. And so not only do we not have the same access for our so-called high-carbon products, we don't even have the same access for our low-carbon products. And so I think that the Commission needs to put its foot down now, and the European community in general. We've never been hard on trade. We've been a bit soft on trade. And I think we need to get harder. I think if we're going to continue to show our leadership, we need to put our foot down. It is not fair that European companies that are moving forward are getting penalized. Now, that said, I don't think you should stop producing the right products, because there's no way in hell, excuse my language, that we're going to meet our net zero goals if you don't. But I do think we need to figure out also associations, I think, because many companies are multinationals. And we all know that there's dumping of high carbon products in some markets and low carbon products in other markets, more polluting processes in some and not in others. I think multinationals also have to be unhypocritical in the way in which they move forward in the 21st century. So I would say shift our trade discussions, ensure that we embed the carbon conversation in our trade. Look at the way in which we cost externalities across the board. I think border taxation is a tough one, but I think we need to look at it. And third, then, make sure that multinationals across the globe commit to producing low-carbon products. And then I think we'll have a fair market, which will make a big difference. Final point on carbon pricing, which everyone is obsessed with. I'm so sick of hearing from the oil and gas sector in particular, but also from many sectors, that they can't do anything until they have a high carbon price. I don't think we're ever going to get the right carbon price in order to really move the products around, or even to invest in CCS the way we would like to. And in that sense, we're going to have other types of enabling policy, whether it be on circularity or in other areas, that ensure that actually companies can move forward and continue to produce low carbon products.
Okay, thanks very much. One more comment from someone in the... Yeah, please.
Good morning, Matti Mannonen from Technology Industries of Finland. Thanks for the good ideas. I think it was Sandrine who pointed out this public procurement. We have on an average, basically in Europe, we have about 15% of our GDP is public procurement. It's huge, it's really huge. And what do you think about if we could have, for example, life cycle cost or life cycle carbon footprint of these kind of issues as selection factors?
Or maybe I could ask Anna to given your experience.
Thank you so much. We are actually looking into that kind of analysis to bring into the budget for the city, and I would be happy if other cities would follow, or perhaps they even do. But especially when it comes to construction sites and materials, because if you look to the CO2 emissions, we have transportation, but we also have construction sites. That's the two main areas for if we want to reduce the CO2 emissions drastically. And then it's the life cycle analysis for material is one thing, but also to use the research and innovation program for test beds. And that's another thing I wanted to add for the discussion, that we need to be a little bit more brave how to use this fund, and also to try to test new plots, new pilots, new demonstrations, and to scale up what works. And for example, it's we're working with the Nordic cities now to see if we can introduce, and also Finland, I think it's a part of that, can we introduce fossil fuel-free construction sites? We can start with one, but have a really ambitious plan to scale if it works. So both plan the scale, but also the first demonstration site at the same time, because we are. And then when it comes to food, I mean, for a city of Stockholm with 1 million inhabitants, we serve approximately 100,000 meals every day for elderly, for pupils in schools. We want to use that power with the procurements for decreasing the CO2 emission from food with 50%. And we shouldn't buy palm oil from Brazil, for example. So that kind of thing, you can use your power in how you do your procurement in the cities. Yeah.
Okay. No, well, thanks for that. And I feel we're running out of time. So what I'd like to do now is to ask our panelists to come back to what we're here for, which is co-creating the future of what we're going to do with the EU's research and innovation program. In particular, the part which is devoted to energy, climate, mobility, cities, all the issues we've been talking about. And if I could, ask you to give us, very briefly, one or two key recommendations of things that we should be thinking about in the future design of the program. And I'd like to start with Magnus and your experience of, how can we get the business community really engaged in a new way?
Well, I think one of the most important thing is to adapt our economic system so that it fits our purposes better. It's in the line of what gets measured gets done. And I think that all of these well-being indices is one way to go. I think at this time we should actually consider changing the way we calculate GDP. We should not move to another measurement. We should actually change it. It's possible. We know who the people are who's working with this. We should affect them to actually get the things that we want into those calculations. I think at least for my generation that will do very many good things.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Philippe, you talked a little bit about nature-based sort of natural solutions and how we should, and what can we do with Horizon Europe to go in the direction you're suggesting?
Very basic. Listen to our kids. That's quite obvious. I mean, they have a good sense we have forgotten, and it's. I'm very optimistic when you see them. When you hear them, they imagine a total different way of life than ours. And when I discuss with my young colleagues, I mean, I find much more open minds, rethinking why. Again, why? I give you a typical example. Have you an idea of the costs, investment, running, and maintenance of underground networks? Mm-hmm. Why do we bury all those cables, those pipes in the grounds, which are not under control? I remember. Which was it in Mexico when they saw with all the electrical networks still hanging in the city. It's static, and we all know as engineers that burying cables consumes a lot of energy, and when you have a broken cable, it takes a lot of time and money to change, including for water supply, etc. Data cabling, and you can make any attentat. How do you say that? Bad action in the ground as aerial.
Terrorist act.
And for example, another thing is underground metro system. It costs a fortune. Mm. Why don't we make it aerial? That's kind of just, and so you have short-term action like 30 kilometers an hour, and then, after all, to build a hospital in Belgium, it takes you 30 years. So 30 years is tomorrow. and thinking about new way of transportation 30 years is tomorrow, etc., etc. So just, let's go lateral thinking. And our kids are much better than us. We are lacking of imagination, and we are forbidding ourselves crazy stuff. Like the thing about the wood on the building. Can you imagine that in Belgium you cannot put wood on the building more than 2 floors? You're crazy, etc.
Okay, thanks for that. Sandrine, particularly on the sort of heavy industry and the really difficult to crack sectors.
Yeah.
What can we do at a European level to sort of help industry in the journey that I think they're already encouragingly embarking on, really to get to the decarbonisation objectives?
So I think first you've done the right thing in shifting your governance in order to enable you to ask the right questions. The missions are going to be the guidance. They're going to be kind of the light, the North Star. And that's super important. So within the missions, to think outside of the box, to think laterally, and to start to work with the governance structures to ensure that you actually fund those projects that for me are, most of the seeds we need for innovation are there. Across the board. The ideas are there. The best practice is there. The technology, in many cases, at least the beginning is there. What I think would be better for research innovation to really focus on is how do we, on one, make sure that we bring all that to scale and shift capital to enable that to happen and put in place the deep demonstration projects like Climate Kick is doing now, and I sit on their board as well, in cities that are looking from a systemic perspective how you put in place the mobility system, the buildings, the zoning, in order to ensure that you're creating a low-carbon system within a city. And what are the different types of unlocking points that actually research and innovation in particular can help? And that's not just technology, that's process, that's policy, etc. And then I'd say that the last point is to ensure that we also bring, so I grew up in California, and when I look at the way in which California has worked with industry and academia, the California Air Resources Board has a triangle of working with Stanford and the UC system and entrepreneurs, and they co-create the technology and the enabling policy together. We need to be better at that. Now, clearly there is an issue because our academia is across different member states and there are different ways of working, etc. But we need to be better aligned across the different member states in terms of the deep academic research and not just moving towards the dollars, but actually, again, linking it to the missions. Yeah. Talking about transport, last point. I was just in Japan, and here's a perfect example of a country that decided to totally shift its system to the bullet train and trains. We did not have to take a plane for anything. We could take trains everywhere. Not only that, the train stations are not in the seediest, most disgusting areas of the city. They're actually in the center of the city, and they have unbelievably beautiful centers of boutiques and food, and so people actually go there. They have community centers, etc. We need to rethink the way we create our cities to enhance people to feel that they're part of a really shifting vision that brings them well-being. And then you can start to really shift into understanding that you need to change your economic system to reflect that.
You're really helping me in moderating this discussion because, of course, you bring us beautifully naturally to Anna and your thoughts on, how can cities be and continue to be a focus of our place-based innovation, what Sandrine is mentioning, and where do you see the main opportunities to spread best practice?
I think this was perfectly addressed just recently, but of course it's about we are the closest to the citizens, and that's why I think that the cities and not the nations perhaps in the future will be the most important actors when it comes to reaching our goals. And of course, for us, it's very important both to work within the network of European cities, and that's why we also have Eurocities and we share best practices, but also work internationally with other cities in different continents also to use best practices. And we need, for our policies within the EU, we have to work on every level and cross-collaborate from the national perspective, EU perspective, but also to, in a much higher degree, involve the cities because we are so close to the citizens and we can really measure the impact of what we are doing and work really as for example, was said with the best and the brightest all over the world when it comes to research, entrepreneurs, when it comes to the city policymakers. And one example is that we now have a collaboration with MIT and the universities in Stockholm to find new solutions on mobility, on segregation, on climate. And that's one example where we can also have transnational collaboration with other researchers, because we have to have a new leadership where we are not in silos. Everyone is talking about it, but it's not so easy when it comes to practice. We have to work together, but we also have to see the citizen could really be EU's test bed for really making the result of the fantastic goals that we are setting up. And for the new commission. So use us more, that is my message.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, well, look, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for your contribution to this incredibly rich discussion today. I won't try and make a full sort of summary of conclusions, because I think this is a conversation that will be continuing. But I think that we are at a moment of exciting opportunity with the institutional transition in the EU, with the Green Deal as the sort of overarching framework, with the introduction of Horizon Europe and a whole range of other programs which we will be coming on stream, and the ideas that we've heard today, whether it's engaging the citizen, whether it's promoting and exploiting new technology, whether it's continuing to exercise global leadership while being hard-headed about what that means in terms of our competitiveness and our economic model. All these things I think are extremely relevant. So I just want to invite you to join me in thanking our panelists, and to wishing you great success for the rest of the Research and Innovation Days, and to encourage you to continue in this spirit of co-creation so that we can really make a better future together. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's on time, right?